Hello, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with the Commissioner. I'm Craig Grella. I am the Fourth Ward Commissioner for Mount Lebanon. And we're going to get into a couple topics. This is really just an open discussion. This is being live streamed on YouTube right now. So if you're looking at our YouTube page, you'll be able to see this there. This also gets recorded, so it'll be available afterward. So thanks for joining us. It's really exciting to have this and to be able to do this. I get a lot of questions as a commissioner, but before we jump into those, I do want to do a couple disclosures and a couple comments. I guess we can call these housekeeping for meetings like this. But so you'll notice Open Lebo on the bottom. This is obviously not an official Mount Lebanon municipal live stream. We don't typically do that. The official meetings of Mount Lebanon are the discussion meetings, which happen the second and fourth Tuesday of every month, and then the official commission meetings, which happen on those same days. And then occasionally commissioners have executive sessions, which are to deal with HR and legal commentary. So those are the official meetings of Mount Lebanon. So this is not an official meeting of Mount Lebanon. I'm a commissioner of Mount Lebanon. I am one of 5 commissioners. So it's important to know that for anything to get done officially, you have to have a majority of commissioners that decide to do something or vote to do something. So I want to just mention that real quickly before we get started, that this is not an official video or live stream. Although I am just one commissioner, I can certainly give you my opinion on things. We'll talk about how you can get official help later on. I will give you my opinion and my commentary and then update you on things that are going on within the municipality. In particular, things that we'll be talking about today for it's 12:02. I mean, we'll be talking roughly for, maybe half hour, 40 minutes, that kind of thing. I don't think we're going to go too long here, depending on how many questions we get as we go live. So I have a bunch of questions that I've gotten over the past couple weeks, both via phone and email, or just residents that I've seen around the neighborhood. So I will try to answer some of those questions. You will see on the right side of the screen here some of those topics. So you'll see topics like real estate development, how to obtain permits, what to watch out for when working with contractors, construction updates. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the updates around town. And then we did a big sports board field study report, or I should say the sports board, which is now rolled into the Parks and Rec board. We had new boards start in April of this year. They did a big field study and utilization report, which may have some effects as we roll forward in terms of field usage and development and recreation programs. So I want to touch on that. At the end, we'll do an open Q&A. So if anyone's on or has questions that go through the chat, we can certainly do that. So if you are on YouTube watching this live, you can go into the chat box and type a question, and we'll be able to see those here, and then I could put them up on the live stream screen. If not, you can always send me an email. I'll put some information up as we go along. And actually, I'm going to flip up the screen here real quick so that you could see just where official questions should go. So you can always go to mountlebanon.org. You can call the phone number on screen and ask for Keith McGill. He's the municipal manager. If you'd like to email all commissioners for any type of official business, you can email commissioners@mountlebanon.org. If you'd like to email me, I'm at cgrella@mountlebanon.org. Again, I'm the 4th Ward Commissioner, which is areas are in and around Sunset Hills, that area. So it's kind of bounded by McNeely, and then it comes up around on the side of Baldwin, and then goes basically up to Washington through the Castle Shannon area, up to Washington, and then back down along Scott and Castle Shannon Boulevard. So it's a large area. That's the 4th Ward. If you're in that ward, feel free to email me anytime. Again, you can see that email there. If you want to get a hold of all commissioners or make a comment, commissioners@mountlebanon.org is the best place to go. And if you ever have an issue, power out, or, obviously you should call your power company. But if there's something that you have a question about related to your road or a municipal service, or, hey, they didn't pick up the garbage, that kind of thing, you could always call the main switchboard at the municipality. The phone number's there. And ask for the municipal manager or one of the other departments like Public Works or things like that. So cool. All right. So let's jump into the topics. Again, these are topics that I received over the last couple weeks, I would say. And also, these are topics that are often repeated, meaning these are questions that I get very often. I've been a commissioner now. I'm in my second term. I've been a commissioner for going on 7 years. I think it is 7 years now. And these are the questions that come up the most. And I don't know why we didn't put these. I mean, we have them on the website. So, for example, I can just quickly share the website here. If you go to the website, mountlebanon.org, this is a brand new website. It launched at the end of last year, early this year. And it was a very big project. It's one of the things when I first became a commissioner, it was one of the things that I thought we really needed, which was better communication with residents. And our old website was just very hard to navigate. So we had a new website designed by a local firm, which really did a fantastic job. And that's what you could see here. But one of the things that I really like about this is it made searching for things a lot easier. So for example, you could just come down here, what are you looking for, and just pop something in that search box. Or you could just come up here and click that search box there and just type something in. So for example, if you were looking for, like permits or something like that, it'll give you all the different options, parking, inspections, and you could just jump right to those pages. So it's a really easy to use website. So if you are looking for things, just come right to the website and pop your search in, and I think you'll find that it's much easier to look at than before. Okay, so first one we get is about real estate development. So I want to talk a little bit about real estate development. It's a topic that comes up often, and there's a lot to it, right? So we could talk about big developments, or we could talk about small developments. We could talk about, hey, I just want to put a bathroom add a bathroom in my house, or I want to add a driveway or a parking pad or things like that. So what's important to understand when we talk about real estate development is the overall process is in place, and we subscribe to municipal code, which is part of our own. It's part of the state code, and then of course we have to follow federal rules. But when we talk about real estate development, it's really both a combination of local, county, and state rules, kind of all mashed into one. And we have our own code for development. So it's helpful to think of a couple different property types, right? We have industrial property types. So think of your factories and things like that, which we really don't have in Mount Lebanon. We obviously have people who make things, but not in the sense that it's a big industrial factory or a big industrial building like, a 1 million square foot Boeing plant or things like that. We really don't have that here in Mount Lebanon. The second property type we have is commercial, right? So think about your businesses, whether that's a business like, a florist shop, or somebody opens up a business, maybe a retail, like a restaurant, or a bar, or just a shop, like a custom framing shop, things like that. Or even kind of big box retail. Again, we don't have a ton of big box retail in Mount Lebanon, but we do have restaurants and fast food places and other businesses. We also have office space, which is sometimes kind of lumped in with commercial property overall. But your office space is pretty self-explanatory. You have doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, things like that. So, office space is a property type as well. And we do have office space throughout Mount Lebanon. There's no one particular zone. Like when you have a really big city, like say a New York or Los Angeles, or even some of the bigger, smaller cities, like like a Chicago or Philadelphia, things like that. They have zones that are made just for particular property types, like only residential in this area or only office in this area. Mount Lebanon is one of the bigger municipalities in Western Pennsylvania, but we're not so big that we have zones just for specific property types. So, you might see that in other states and other cities, but that's not something we have here. We have a lot of different property types and property uses mixed in with different areas. For example, the Beverly area has a lot of residential areas, and it also has business and commercial areas in there. And they're kind of all situated next to each other. So that's a lot of what we have here in Mount Lebanon, a lot of different areas. So then the last property type, of course, is residential. And think of these as your single family homes, apartment buildings, townhomes, condominiums, that type of stuff, apartments. Those are all residential. And residential is really considered from 1 to 4 units. After you get above 4 units, it's residential, but it can sometimes be considered commercial because it's typically investment properties or big apartment buildings, things like that. So obviously, residential is the property type. How it's considered may be different based on the number of units that are there. It's also different how we deal with it in our zoning code. So I guess that's a good segue into a conversation about zoning. So we talked a little bit about the difference of property types, and now what we can do is talk about zoning. So zoning really controls where you can do things and what you can do in those areas, right? So if you think about zoning, there are certain zones that we have, right? And you may have heard things like R1 or R2 or R3 or commercial or mixed use. Those are kind of zones that we have. Our Uptown Commercial District is a zone that allows for commercial businesses and residential. There are some zones that only allow for residential, meaning you can't have a commercial business in that zone. So, for example, some areas of, say, Sunset Hills or other areas in the municipality will only have R1. That means a single family home. That's the only thing that you could build there. The zoning code also will tell you what can be done in those areas, right? So once you know the area you're talking about, whether it's your existing house or maybe a vacant lot that you're thinking about developing, or an existing house that you want to knock down and maybe redevelop or add on to, you know your area. The zoning code will also tell you what you can do there. The zoning code will give you things like, what are my setbacks, right? So how far from the street do I need to make my house, right? Because in some areas you might not be able to build the front of your house within a certain distance. That could be 25 feet, could be 30 feet, could be 50 feet. It all depends on where you are and what the zoning type is. Typically in R2s or R3s where we have higher density, a higher number of residential units, you can build a little bit closer to the front of the street. In residential areas, it's a further setback. We also have rules in zoning about property setbacks for the backyard so that you're not on top of your neighbors, and even your side yard so that you're not putting things in your yard that are going to be too close to your neighbors. We get a lot of complaints about air conditioners that get put on the side of the house. And in really tight areas where the houses are closer together, some older air conditioners can be very noisy, and that can basically be annoying to neighbors, especially if they're running late at night, things like that. So the zoning rules are in place to make sure that things on your property aren't too close to your neighbors so that they might cause problems. So that's zoning, right? It's going to tell you where you can do things and in those areas, what you can do there, right? So that's something that is a consideration. We also have something called the Subdivision and Land Development Ordinance. And you may have heard this called SALDO. That's just the initials for the ordinance. Subdivision and Land Development Ordinance. And essentially what that does is really that is the boundaries for new developments. And it controls things like what are you going to do if you need to install, sanitary or storm sewers, or where do they go? Where do utilities go? It's really for larger developments, new developments. Maybe people are coming in and developing several lots, things like that. The SALDO might apply. Generally speaking, while zoning and SALDO are overarching overall real estate development, when you're a built community like Mount Lebanon, we are something like 90+% built, meaning there isn't a lot of our municipality that isn't already built up with existing homes. You're really talking about just additions, adding on, changing, redevelopments, things like that. And for that, mostly it's going to be the zoning code that is the code that you need to look at. The questions we get most often, the questions that I get most often are things like, how can I build a fence? Can I even build a fence? And if I can, where? I'd like to put a fence in my front yard. Is that allowed? Is it not allowed? The zoning code's going to tell you that. I want to put a fence in my backyard to keep my pets in. Is that allowed? And if so, where can I do it and what are the requirements? That's what the zoning code is going to tell you. You want to add a parking pad because your teenager is now driving and you have an extra car and your one-car driveway doesn't fit all the cars in your family anymore. You might need to get a driveway permit, things like that. So that's essentially how property works and how development works for your normal residential property. So single family home, and maybe you have a 4-bedroom and a 2-bath, and you want to add an extra bath. Pretty easy. You go to the zoning code, you go get permits, and I'll talk about permits in a minute. Now, new developments are a different thing. New developments will require a plan or a set of plans according to our rules, our subdivision and land ordinance rules. SALDO basically call for a certain number of things to be done. So, for example, we have a couple properties that are vacant right now, which I'm sure you've seen, right? One of the big properties at the beginning of Washington Boulevard as you get into Mount Lebanon is on the corner of Washington and Bower Hill. And that's a large property that is vacant right now. It's owned by a developer. and it's sitting vacant, meaning there's nothing there right now. But um, to develop property like that piece of property, one would have to submit a list of plans, right? A site plan, stormwater plan, electrical plans, traffic studies and plans and things like that to develop that property into a multi-use. And I think the plans that had been submitted for that particular property in the past were things like townhomes or apartments or whatever the particular plan was. I'm making this up. This is not the exact plan, but let's say it was for 40 townhomes, right? That developer would have to come to the table with plans for what those 40 townhomes would look like. And then essentially what they would do is they would meet with the manager, the assistant manager, who's also the municipal planner, and they would go over all of our requirements in Mount Lebanon. Now, we are stricter than most, which I'm sure you've heard, and we'll talk a little bit about that in permitting. There's a little bit of misnomer in terms of how tough we are with permitting and things like that. But from a development standpoint, if you're developing new property, you would essentially meet with the manager and the assistant manager, although that's not necessarily required. It's a great thing to do. We call them pre-development meetings where you find out what you can develop, where you can develop, and it shortcuts a lot of information gathering and trying to find information out there. But once you do that and you have an idea, so again, let's just use this as a fictional example. If somebody were or would want to build, say, 40 townhouses on that property, Washington and Bower Hill, they would essentially have to put together a site plan and an entire set of plans to show what they're going to do there. And those plans have to meet our zoning code regulations, and they have to meet our subdivision and land development ordinance. So those two things together, they would submit their plans, and that goes basically to our planning commission. So we follow the municipal code and we elect to have a planning commission. And our planning commission is made up of residents, and it's a volunteer gig. And we have a certain number of people who sit on that board for a certain period of time. Usually it's a period of anywhere between 2 and 4 years. And they essentially know the zoning code and they know the saldo, and they get the plans from developers who want to build things in Mount Lebanon. And they look at those plans and they make sure that those plans fit our codes. At the same time, our municipal engineer, which is Gateway Engineering, will also look at those and make sure that the plans that are being given to us by the developer fit our codes, zoning and saldo, and any other codes that might apply. The engineer will then usually write up a list of things saying whether it fits or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, they'll write up a list. And sometimes that list could be 10, 15, 20 pages long with 200 items. You need to do this, you need to do this doesn't fit the code, this fits the code, but you may want to think about this. The curb is too big, the curb is too small, there's too much or not enough green space, there's too much building, you're off with your setback, you can't have that building type here, things like that. And we have gotten large developments where the engineer's comments are literally 20, 30 pages long. So those are things that the developer would have to address and then resubmit to be able to move forward with that kind of plan. Also, the Planning Commission is going to have their own notes based on property type or property material, or they might work with the developer to say, hey, you know, I know this is technically allowed, but we've heard a lot from residents that they'd like to see this. So maybe you consider changing materials instead of, you know, doing asphalt street, maybe you do a brick interior street, or instead of this type of material on the fascia, maybe you could do this type of material. So they'll work with the developers to do things like that. If the plans just flat out don't fit our codes, the Planning Commission will tell them, look, it doesn't fit our codes. These plans are denied. You can't build this in our area. So that does happen from time to time. So the process would be developer creates plans, right? Has an idea of where they want to develop. Maybe they have an interest in a property, like they own a property or they have an option on a property to buy, a contract to buy that property, and they want to develop that property. So they create plans, they send those plans to our planning commission. And the planning commission works with the engineers and anyone else. If there's traffic issues involved, they'll work with the police. The police will get involved with that. If there are a special road, like if they're developing on Washington, that's a state road, right? So there may need to be comments from PennDOT, which will regulate how state roads operate and what can be done on those state roads. If it's a county road, then the county might get involved in terms of their development processes. So all of that gets wrapped in and managed by Mount Lebanon Planning Commission. And there's a certain period of time with which we need to give a person an answer. So if someone submits plans to us, we look at those plans and we get back to them, usually within 90 days. The timeline could be different or shorter depending on the type of application, but there's a period of time in which we look at things. Those plans get reviewed, and usually we provide comments. It's very rare that we would outright deny somebody. We would usually go through and say, look, here are some things that you need to do that, we're not going to approve these right now, but you should go back and you should look at these plans. And here's our code so that you can really understand what you need to do to make this compliant with our code before we issue an approval. Those who submit plans and everything is perfect, maybe developers that have worked in Mount Lebanon before, or maybe just doing a couple homes or even just one home, they know the rules, they create plans that fit. When everything fits the code, the Planning Commission will issue what's called a prelim or preliminary approval. All of the approvals technically need to go through the commission. So the 5 commissioners will get together during a commission meeting and they will vote on those approvals. So what happens is the Planning Commission will get together and issue either a denial, or they'll work with the developer, or at some point when the plans actually meet code, they will issue a prelim approval. Once the prelim approval is done, that will go to the commission for final approval. And the commission has the ability to either approve or not approve a particular plan. Because we have the Planning Commission, we really delegate, our elected officials and our staff delegate the power of preliminary approval to the Planning Commission. So unless the property or the plan is changing significantly or deviating from what the Planning Commission looked at, it's very hard for the commission and staff to turn that down. We use the Planning Commission to do that first layer of vetting. And it's a great process, and they look at a lot of properties. So it's a good thing that we have that. It also gets our residents involved, and it's a process that is open to the public. So any member of the public can go to the Planning Commission meetings and understand what's happening and have input and can comment on that. And that will weigh on the planning commissioners or the planning members, the board members' minds as they decide whether to approve something or not. Of course, they need to look at our zoning code and our saldo, but if there is opposition from residents to certain projects, obviously those types of residents can make their public comments at those meetings. And speak directly to the board members of the Planning Commission, and also later to the commissioners in public comment as well. But my point is, the Planning Commission will issue that preliminary approval, and then the commission will look at that and issue final approval. Now, some of the things that may stop final approval from happening is really at the saldo. It's the commissioners that determine whether to approve things that might not fit the saldo. So you can have all the zoning things met where maybe variances aren't needed, but the items in the subdivision and land development ordinance are not met. And those are the purview of the commission. So the commissioners get to determine whether something moves forward if it doesn't fit the saldo. So even if something doesn't fit the salvo, they can ask for a waiver from the saldo. And this could be as simple as, we were supposed to plant 10 trees in this area, but we could only fit 9. Now, that's not a major variation, so that might be something that the commission says, okay, it doesn't fit our requirements exactly, but it's not a major difference or variation, so we're going to approve the project anyway. Or maybe the driveway needs to be in a certain place, but it's 2 feet over because of utilities and they can't build it there. So there's some characteristic of the property that makes it hard to fit the saldo. So technically they're looking for a waiver from the saldo, but maybe the commission gives them that waiver because it's not really a big disturbance from the saldo. In other situations, and we've turned down developments in the past because there have been just a huge number of waivers requested, maybe 10 or 15 waivers from the saldo, and multiple variances that would have to go in front of our zoning hearing board. In those situations when there are so many requests for variances, you could tell that it's so far off the saldo and so far off our zoning that it really doesn't meet code. And even though it may have received a preliminary approval from the Planning Commission, there are some times where those have been turned down by the commission because the commission believes that those properties are not conforming enough with the saldo or the zoning code that they can be turned down. The developers always have recourse, and their recourse would be to go to court and say, hey, we think that these rules were misapplied by the Planning Commission or the commission. And in most of the cases where that's actually happened, the courts have upheld the decision of our planning commission and our commission. I certainly can't comment on which projects would or wouldn't be when it reaches the court in the future, but we have a pretty good record of really understanding the rules and the laws and applying them evenly and fairly as we look at these projects. So just to recap again, so our property development is really different property types, looking at the zoning code, what property type can be done in what area, and what are the rules for those properties in those areas. And then looking at the subdivision and land development ordinance and whether the changes that are requested or the new development really fit those changes. For large and new developments, they go in front of the Planning Commission and then the Commission for approval or non-approval. And for little simple things like, hey, I just want to build a driveway, or I want to make my driveway bigger, or I want to build a wall on the front of my house, the side of my house, I want to add an extension, things like that. You don't have to go in front of the commission to do those things. You go through the permitting process. Obviously, you have to follow the zoning code, and if saldo applies, the manager or the municipal planner will tell you. But if you are thinking about doing those things, if you're thinking about, hey, I want to add a bathroom, you have to understand the permitting process for that. And it's actually pretty easy. Again, on the website, I'll show in just a moment, you could see how that works and where that goes. But now we could take a quick segue into maybe how we obtain permits. And this is for things like, again, I want to build a wall, I want to build a fence, a driveway, an addition, things like that. So what we're talking about really is permits. And that's the next section of what we're going to cover here in terms of the topics that are asked most frequently. Let me just check if we have questions online. No additional questions yet. Okay, so property type. I'm sorry, not property types, permits. Let's say that you want to add a bathroom and you need to get a building permit, right, to add that bathroom. And maybe in Allegheny County, if you're adding a bathroom of a certain size, you need to get a permit from the county related to plumbing. So you need to deal with a licensed master plumber. There are some exceptions. If you're doing the work yourself in your own home, there are some times or some carve-outs where you don't need to get any type of licensee to do that for you. You may not need a licensed master plumber. You can do it yourself. Now, you still have to follow building codes, right? So that goes through our code enforcement, meaning the toilet has to be placed a certain distance away from the wall and a certain distance between the toilet and a sink, like for legroom or a bathtub or a shower, things like that. So, while you might not necessarily need to use a master plumber if it's your own home, you still need to follow building codes. You can't just, hey, put a toilet bowl in the middle of a bathtub kind of thing, right? So there are building codes you need to follow. So when you talk about permits, getting a permit, again, we'll just use this adding a bathroom example. You need to follow the building codes for residential development for our municipality. And we follow the statewide building codes. So those codes are published, and we have links. Again, if you go on our website, we have links for the building codes. We have statewide building codes, and we have a code enforcement officer who you can call and get information from. Now, that person's not going to walk you through every step of the process and how to do an addition. You need to either know that yourself or hire a contractor to do it. If you hire a contractor, then you have to go and obtain, say again, for plumbing, adding a bathroom, you probably need to get a licensed master plumber who's licensed through the county and possibly through the state, but generally it's just Allegheny County. And then they will have a plumbing inspection, and then we'll have our own building inspection. So in those cases, you usually need to get a plumbing permit, which is done through the county, and then you need to get a building permit, which is done through the local municipality. So to generalize this, you will have local permits you need to get, and then you might have county permits that you need to get depending on the type of property. So for example, if you're in the city of Pittsburgh, right, so you're downtown, you might need a city electrical permit, you might need a plumbing permit, and then you need the city general building permit. Here in Mount Lebanon, we typically have general building permits. We have specialized permits, again, for things like walls and fences. And then if you are doing things that require county permits like plumbing, then you would go to the county for that, and then it would all be managed through our process. The county plumbing inspectors will come out and then we'll look at that stuff too. So that's generally how permits happen. Now, on the website, I'll just show you that real quick. So if you go to the website, in the inspections and permits section, so you'll see here again, if you could get to this just by typing in up top. If I just type permits, you'll see inspections, permits, and zoning, and then you'll be taken to this area which shows you how to get permits, things like that. So you can look at permit requirements. You could also just call the phone number. It'll go to the municipal planner, and the municipal planner will tell you what types of permits you need for that project. So if you call and say, look, I think I'm going to add a bathroom in my house. What permits do I need? They will tell you what permits you need to get. In some cases, they'll even come out and look, or you can meet with them. They'll pull up your property and they might have information like a survey, see how big your property is, things like that. And they'll work with you to give you information about what you need to do. Down below, you'll see the different types of permit applications. So a general building permit for residential, for example, you just click here. If you're building a front porch or stairs, or maybe you want to add a pool, or you need to do some grading, or you're adding a patio, things like that, you could look at the different things here, and this will give you different things that you might need to do. So for example, kitchen, bathroom remodels. Let's take a look at that one. So it'll say for single family dwellings, proposed kitchen and bathroom models involving structural alterations like a new changed header, boring, notching, joists, things like that. We can go to this permit application. So this is going to pull up the actual application that you need to do. And it's going to tell you what you need to include in those things to get your permits, different types of plans that you might need to do that might be required. For example, if you're not doing a bathroom or disturbing 500 square feet of property, you don't need to do a stormwater plan. So it's only 100 square feet. You don't need that type of plan, that kind of thing. So you'll have information here on how that gets done. Again, a general building permit, you could see here, that application is here, and it'll tell you what you need for that. Now, we might have some of this stuff on file, in which case you may not need to give it all. There may have been, previous plans done, or we may just have this information for you. Some of this stuff is actually pretty easy to do. You do not require necessarily all the time engineers sign documents with surveys and floor plans and things like that. It all depends on the type of permit that you're looking for and the type of building that you're trying to do. So the best place to go is to the municipal website, to come over to the permit area, and to look for the type of thing that you're doing. Adding a sign, adding a shed, adding solar panels, that kind of thing, and you could add it. If you're not sure, the best thing to do is to call this phone number, 412-343-3408, and you can talk to the code enforcement officer or our municipal planner, and they will tell you what you need to do for your application. And that's the best way to get started. It helps shortcut a lot of the research and work that you need to do. So I recommend that you do that. Now, once you have submitted those things, that will be submitted usually with a small fee that could range from a couple dollars to a couple hundred, depending on the size and what you're doing. Once that goes to the municipal planner or the code enforcement officers, they will take a look at it. If it requires an engineer to review it, our municipal engineer will review that. But most of the times it goes to our permitting office and they will take a look at it. And it usually only takes them anywhere from a couple days. I think they ask for maybe 2 weeks to approve something. But usually it gets done with a couple days. I've seen it get done in as quick as a day. And that will be approved. If it gets approved, it will be given to you and you'll put that permit up at your house, and then you'll be able to start work on what you want to do. Again, let's just call it a bathroom remodel or a bathroom addition. Maybe you've got your county permit, which follows the same process. If you're not sure where, our people can help you find that. You can also go to the county website and look that up there. It's really not too hard to do. Now you have a contractor. Let's say you're working with a contractor and you have a contractor who's a general contractor who, if you're hiring a general contractor, you might not have to do any of this. The contractor might do the permit for you, and that's typically what happens. Also, if you're hiring a plumber to work with your general contractor, the plumber will do the plumbing permit. So if you're not doing this work yourself, You might be hiring a contractor, like a general contractor, to do the framing and building it out, to do the addition, and then maybe the plumber's coming in to do the plumbing. Maybe you have an electrician coming in to put electrical panels or outlets inside the property. So you might have a couple different permits there. But your contractors will work with you to fill that information out for you, submit it, and then work with the municipality and or the county to make sure that those things are done properly, that you have the permits before you start work. Because if you don't have permits and you start work that require permits, if the municipality inspects that and finds out that work is being done without permits, they could stop that project. They could basically shut that project down. And there's a reason we do that. It happens from time to time, and residents get really annoyed when that happens because they have to stop work and maybe the contractor goes away. But there's a reason we have zoning codes. There's a reason we have building codes, right? And the way I explain this is, think of the story of the three little pigs, where um, you have one pig who builds a house out of little sticks or hay, and one that builds it out of bricks, right? And um, so the idea here is, based on our history, based on good engineering practices, based on all of our history building and inspecting and looking at houses. I'm not saying just Mount Lebanon, but generally, whether it's municipalities, managers, engineers, lawyers, things like that. Based on our history of building things, we know what is strong and what is weak. And what we try to do, whether it's state law or local law, state building code or even local building codes, is we try to make sure that people follow best practices when they build certain things. There are best practices for where you put a toilet. There are best practices for how to build a house. There are best practices if you're using a stick built or a wood framed house. There are best practices if you're building a brick or a concrete structure. So that's why we have building codes, and those best practices are in the building codes. We don't want houses to fall down after they're built. We don't want decks to fall down and collapse under weight that shouldn't collapse those decks. And these things have happened. Pools have collapsed. Walls have collapsed. People have been hurt with these things before. Homes have been poorly built and have fallen down in our history, right? And people have gotten hurt. And that's the reason we develop building codes. And that's the reason why we require, when people build in our municipality, that they follow those building codes. There's also a reason why we check those things. So if you're not following building codes, the municipality does have the ability to shut that project down. Again, it doesn't happen often, but it has happened. So if you are thinking about building anything, the first thing you should do is go to the municipal website, look for the type of job you're doing in the permit section, and try to find out if an associated permit is required. If it is, you can call the municipal manager at the number listed on the website and get more information. If it's not, uh, obviously you would want to look into that. I like to be sure. Even when I've done stuff like when I added a shed, I needed a shed permit. I didn't know that. I actually called the municipal manager, spoke to the code enforcement officer, and they told me what was needed to put a shed in my backyard. I had to build a concrete pad, things like that. So if you have any questions or any doubt, call the permitting office and get the information that you need. They will tell you exactly what you need to do. And then whether you need to do it yourself or go out and hire a contractor. Now, that's the next thing that I want to talk about, which is working with contractors. If you do decide to work with contractors, there are some things you need to watch out for. Oftentimes, you will hear horror stories with people who hire a contractor who's never worked in Mount Lebanon, and they don't understand the process, or maybe they try to shortcut the process and they don't get permits and they get shut down. Then the resident is left holding the bag because the contractor leaves, they can't finish the job, maybe they paid money already, they can't get it back. Most often when that happens, what happens is the contractor just hasn't followed the rules. Maybe that contractor told you they know everything that needs to be done, but they didn't actually apply for permits. That happens all the time, unfortunately. All the time that happens. Several times a year, I get calls from residents, especially in the Fourth Ward, who hired a contractor who never applied for a permit and started doing work. And maybe a neighbor complained because they were doing work at 11 o'clock at night and it was loud, or they had construction equipment outside where they shouldn't have had it. Somebody complains, code enforcement comes out, finds out there's no permit, and they shut the project down. That happens, unfortunately, too often because most of the time, either the homeowner doesn't get the permit or the contractor doesn't get the permit. Sometimes, I don't want to say it's nefarious, but the contractor told the resident that they were going to get a permit and they just didn't because they didn't want to spend the money or waste time. That's a problem. Other times, the contractor just maybe gets the wrong permit or starts building before they get the permit. Um, Most often, contractors know what they're doing and they get the proper permits. But it's important for you as a resident and a homeowner or a property owner to understand, if you are going to work with a contractor, that that contractor know what they're doing. Ask them if they've worked in Mount Lebanon. And if they haven't, ask them if they understand what needs to be done, or offer to put them together with the municipal planner or the code enforcement officers. They will be happy to meet with those people to make sure that projects are done right. Believe me, nobody cares about the $25 fine for a permit or for shutting down a project. We want it to be done right. We would rather have the project be done right than to go in and stop projects and fine people because they're not following the rules. We'd rather have the project be done right, be done on time, and residents be happy with their additions than to have to go in and, we're going to do inspections anyway, but, if things are found to be wrong, the project's going to be stopped, or we're going to ask you to change things up. And there may be fees involved with those things. So we'd rather things be done right the first time. So feel free to call the inspections office, feel free to call the permit officers and the code enforcement officers and the municipal planner. They will work with you to make sure that things are done right. So the types of permits you need are going to be based on the type of work you need. And it's always good to work with a licensed and bonded contractor. So that means that if something happens, right? So one, it might be required that they have a license to do, say, electrical work or plumbing work. If they don't, they might not be able to get that work approved through an inspection through the county or locally. If they're bonded and insured, that means that if something happens, right, they're working in your house and the ceiling collapses and you get hurt, you'll be able to work through their insurance to have your injuries covered. Also, if there is negligence or there is a problem with their work, that might get done through their insurance as well. If there's a stoppage in work, say, for example, they just didn't get the permits they were supposed to get, the bonding company may come in and be able to finish that project even if the contractor can't. So that's the reason why you want to work with a licensed and insured and bonded contractor on a particular job where you might be working with contractors. Of course, you're going to get the permit that matches, right? So if you're working with a contractor to build a wall, you want to make sure that that contractor gets a wall permit. If you're working with a contractor to build a driveway, they need to get a driveway permit. I think you understand the different types. And again, if you're not sure, go to the website and check the types of permits there. So that's the information on how to work with contractors. Again, a lot of times we do get complaints from residents who work with contractors who just don't follow the rules. I'll give you another scenario, which I've run into, unfortunately, many times. Contractors are doing a driveway and a wall, and the resident brings in 4 or 5 contractors. They think they're doing a good job by getting multiple quotes. They go with one that they think is reasonable and they have a lot of experience. Maybe they've worked in Mount Lebanon before. And the contractor says, look, we'll take care of all the permits for you. And the resident says, great. The resident gives them, say, $2,000, $3,000 to start the job. Maybe it's a $10,000 job. They give them $3,000 or $4,000 to start. The contractor comes out, starts work. The contractor never got a permit. Or the contractor actually applied for a permit, but didn't give the municipality all the information required to get that permit. They might have made the application, but we got back to them and said, hey, this wall doesn't meet our guidelines. It needs to be 4 feet, but it's 8. And the contractor will actually think that they can submit the permit for the permit and just start working, when in reality, they never obtained the permit. And sometimes that project will get stopped. And then the contractor knows that they have to do all this extra work, or maybe they have to pay extra money and they don't want to do that. So the contractor just stops showing up, or maybe they go away, or maybe they move on to another project. And the resident is left with a half-finished driveway, a ripped-up wall, and no permit, and they've paid the person $4,000. You'd be surprised how often that happens, because the contractor didn't get the proper permits and the resident didn't know about it because the resident thought the contractor was going to do everything for them, or at least that's what they offered to do. Many contractors think that Mount Lebanon is really tough or even impossible to work with, which is not true. We have very specific codes, very specific rules, and they're generally spelled out pretty well, not only on our website and in our municipal code, but again, you could call the municipal planner or the code enforcement officers and they will give you the rules. And in a lot of cases, they'll come out and say, the stair tread needs to be this, or the wall height needs to be this, or it needs to have this much gravel or a pipe behind it, that kind of thing. So they'll give you very specific instructions as to what needs to be done. So we have unfortunately had those kind of complaints before. So, if you want to save money or at least not waste money, make sure that you're dealing with the right permits for the right type of project. Uh, let's talk a little bit about construction updates. This was one of the questions I got actually a couple days ago. A couple of residents were inquiring about a few properties around Mount Lebanon. One of them that I spoke about a little bit earlier, and that one is construction updates at Washington and Bower Hill. This is owned by, this property is owned by a developer that has done a lot of developments in Western PA. And previously, this property had been approved for apartments, and then it was actually, they had changed plans and submitted plans to the Planning Commission and then to the Commission to do townhomes. Most recently, there has been another interested party that is working with that developer who's thinking about doing a mixed-use development. Now, they haven't submitted any plans officially, but they are talking to the municipality about doing a mix of uses. Maybe it's townhomes with condos, things like that. The exact nature of their plans, again, they haven't submitted actual plans, but there is an interested party working with that developer who has reached out to the municipality to discuss what can I develop here, what can be developed. Now, they typically have a certain period of time to develop those plans and then work with the municipality. We don't have the details of their arrangement or their interest in the property, but typically those types of things are for a certain period of time, whether it's a couple months or a year. So I would imagine that that particular interested party will start moving along the process, hopefully relatively quickly, and get plans into the municipality so that we can look at it and either deny them or approve them. Hopefully, they're submitting plans that fit our zoning in Saldo. But there has been a little bit of an update on that property, in so much as there is an interested party that is interested in working on that project and moving forward with plans. The municipality does not have plans yet, but that might be something that gets done in the near future. In terms of the Fourth Ward, there are two other properties that are currently out there that are really open. One is owned by a local developer as well. It's at the corner of Mount Lebanon Boulevard and Castle Shannon Boulevard. It's near the Shop and Save on the border of Castle Shannon. There is no update to that property. There are no plans. There have been no plans introduced. There had been plans in the past for different types of properties. Those plans were abandoned and not developed. There is no currently approved type of plan for that property. So that one is currently sitting vacant. And then the third big property, again, is also in the Fourth Ward, but it's very big. It's 23 plus acres, and it's called McNeely Field, and it's on McNeely Road near Seton LaSalle and the Salvation Army up there. And it's a very large piece of property. I think it's probably the biggest remaining open piece of property in Mount Lebanon. There have been various discussions as to what would be done with that property. Nothing has been approved, but it has to be used. We have a carve out for the type of use. It has to be used for some sort of municipal recreation, public use. That was a covenant that was put on the property when we bought it. So there are some restrictions on how that property can be used. And this kind of dovetails into the last item for conversation here, which is the sports field study, which we'll talk about in conjunction with the construction updates. The sports board last year did a massive study where they looked at all the fields, whether it was owned by the municipality or it was owned by the school board or the school district, and controlled decisions made by the school board and the district, the staff there, or it was a combo use. We have fields that are used by both the school and the municipality, and they share maintenance and things like that. So the sports board looked at all of that. Then they also looked at all of the teams, whether it was an official team like of the school or it was a club team like the Mount Lebanon Soccer Association or the Field Hockey Association or hockey, things like that. And they looked at all of our rec programs and how many people are on a team and how many teams are there in a sport. When does that sport play on certain fields? How many hours are those fields open? What's the utilization of those fields? Meaning, what percent of field times are those fields used? And I can tell you that their study was very detailed, and they did a statistical analysis of all the different fields and the usage times, and it was a massive, massive study done by the sports board, and they did a phenomenal job. And they delivered that to the school district and also to the municipality, and we're able to look at it. And along with that came certain recommendations. Now, what they found was that most of our fields are at 100% utilization or more, meaning if there's an hour that it can be used, it's used for that hour, completely booked up, completely full all year round. That is the status at which most of our current fields exist today, whether it's the Rock Pile or Seymour Field or Middle Field or Brafferton Field, things like that. These fields are at capacity with our schools using them, with open municipal public usage, or with clubs that use it for free or that rent our fields. Almost completely across the board, 100% utilized. So what the sports study said was they gave us recommendations of what we could do to, one, increase field utilization, basically increase the hours of usage. And they also made recommendations related to other properties like McNeely Field, which is not currently being used. So the sports board recommended a whole bunch of things, and I'll just talk about a few of them. And you could see that if you go again on the website and you look at the boards and you go to the sports board or you go to the Parks and Rec board, which is now the sports board is part of Parks and Rec, and you look at previous minutes and agendas, you will see that field study. And if you actually want a copy of the study, you can email me. I'll put my information up here. You could email me at cgrella@mountlebanon.org, and I will send you a copy of that study, which is public. And you could see for yourself what was recommended in that study. But I could tell you one of the things that was recommended was we have lights at certain fields, like Seymour Middle, those fields are lit, but they're only lit for certain periods of the day. So we have other fields that are not lit. So one of the recommendations was to add lights at some of the fields that are not currently lit, which expands during certain times of the year, hours of play at those fields, which then increase our or decrease the utilization, which gives us the ability to utilize those fields more. So that was one recommendation they made. They also made recommendations related to how the school books out certain fields, particularly the stadium. And they made recommendations related to the cost of how certain things are done. I believe they recommended that the school lower the cost of the stadium, but increase the cost of other fields. They made the same recommendation to the municipality for some of its fields. One of the other recommendations that they made was to develop McNeely Field. Now, there was a plan in place that Gateway Engineers did a couple years ago. That plan did not move forward at the time. It was probably about a decade ago, and it was several commissions ago, different than I think any of the commissioners that are on the board now. And so the sports board, the Parks and Rec board, are now calling for that plan to be revived. That doesn't mean that that is going to get done, but they're saying, hey, why don't we dust off that plan and maybe update it? Let's make sure that it's updated to the current building codes and what the municipality and the residents would like to see. Let's make sure we work with residents to integrate that area of the community better into the overall community because it's on the outskirts over on McNeely. And maybe we have a different desire for other things, like maybe we increase the walking trails, or maybe we change one of the field usage to something different than what was proposed 10 years ago because our needs have changed or the culture has changed in terms of sports. So they're asking for the municipality and the commission to take a look at that. And they're recommending that we do some sort of development for recreation. So the idea is there's a certain number of hours that we can add to our playing time if we do things like add lights at certain fields. And there's also an additional utilization that we get, or a certain hours of playing time that we get if we develop those additional fields. And there might be some participation with the school board as well. We might have school teams that are able to play on bigger fields if we develop them, say, at McNeely Field. So those are all considerations that are currently going on. So if you have questions about that, or you'd like to get more information, again, just shoot me an email and I'd be happy to send you that field study. We will be discussing this as we move into budget session, not only this year and next year. So if you have questions or you have comments or opinions on how we should develop property or how we should do our rec programs, please feel free to make a public comment. Again, you could email me or you could email all the commissioners here, commissioners@mountlebanon.org, or you could email me, cgrella@mountlebanon.org. And I'd be happy to respond to you either via email or via phone. Or we can meet in person and talk about that as well. And if you have comments about anything that we've discussed here today, feel free to give us a buzz at any of those. So if you have any questions or any comments that you want to send over, again, commissioners@mountlebanon.org or cgrella@mountlebanon.org. You can get a hold of the commissioners or you can get a hold of me. If you have a general question, you could call the phone number or ask for Keith McGill, who's the municipal manager, and he can certainly direct you to the right place. This is how you get official answers to official questions. So just a kind of recap of what we covered here. Real estate development, permits, working with contractors, construction updates, the sports field study, and then just general open Q&A. So again, if you have further questions and you want to get an official answer, email me directly, email the municipality or all the commissioners, or give the municipality a call and ask to speak to the municipal manager who can give you some guidance on really any topic related to any service, whether it's street construction, uh, parking, parking hours uptown development, things like that. Any questions that you might have, give a shout, and we can certainly have the municipal staff, the proper municipal staff, answer your questions. So it's great. Thank you for joining. You should be able to go to the Open Lebo YouTube page to find this video recorded, and you can replay this anytime. This will be up there in perpetuity. If you have any questions, go ahead and email or call. And then we're going to look to do these once a week. So if you have any questions that you would like to have answered, you can email me directly for an official answer. You could also go to openlebo.com/questions. And you can ask a question, and that will take you to a form. And you can fill out that form and ask a quick question. And I will answer that question in a future coffee with a commissioner. So for example, let me show you that real quick. So here's what that looks like. So openlebo.com/question, that's singular. And you can just fill out your information here, put the question in that you want to ask. That will come to me directly, and I will answer that in a future Coffee with a Commissioner. I'm planning to do these every Friday at noon. So if you are working, maybe you could, check this out at lunch. If you can't get out at lunch, you can always go to the page and look at that in YouTube. You can add a chat or a comment in chat, and then I will answer those comments in those chats. I'll also answer any emails that get sent to us as well. So thanks again for joining. Really appreciate your time. And please do send in questions that we can cover for future sessions. I do have additional questions that we didn't have time to get to today, so I'll add those to the next Coffee with a Commissioner that we do. If you'd also like to do these in person, let us know. We can go down to one of the coffee shops around town and meet up and do this in person and take questions live in person too. So feel free to send me a note if you'd like to do that. Thanks again for joining, and we will see you soon.